What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're on part 3 of the micro camper build and we're going to work on starting the actual body of the camper. Previous videos we did the frame, then we wired up all the lights, got the suspension all set up. So if you haven't seen those videos, go check those out. Lots of useful information there. As always, going to give you a rundown of where we're headed here. As you can see, those panels on the left side of the screen, those are going to be the structure that we're going to build out of our square tubing itself, and then in the end we'll end up looking more like what you see on the right here. The metal tubing we're using is 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch 16th wall, which I believe is 16 gauge. It only weighs about 0.6 pounds per foot, so it's super light, but it's still steel, so it's strong. And plus, when you have it all tied together like we're planning on doing, I think it'll make for a very, very sturdy structure. Our outside walls, we're going to be doing an aluminum composite panel. This is 3 millimeters thick. It's basically a very thin piece of aluminum, composite paneling, and then another thin piece of aluminum. And you can get it in different colors. This is in white. This is just a protective film that's on it. So this is what we're going to be attaching to our body to create our exterior look, and I think it'll be a nice professional finish. As you can see here, I've planned out my cuts that I'm going to make on these pieces of metal. So each one is labeled for what wall they're going to feed. The long line on the bottom is the size that the piece of metal came in, and then all the little dashes above it are the cuts I'm going to be making. And on this app on draft paper, you can actually sit there and take a ruler and measure the cuts you've already made, so you can plan ahead, know exactly what kind of cuts you're going to do and how you're going to do them, and it just makes things very simple when you're dealing with a lot of little cuts like this. What we're going to be doing to cut our little 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch steel tube is a Diablo Steel Demon blade. This thing cuts through this stuff like butter. It's not supposed to be run on a miter saw with this high RPMs, but I think it'll last me long enough to get this project done. It's meant to be run on a dry chop saw, so beware, you're going to pay like $40 for this blade, and if you do not have the right chop saw, it may not last as long as you'd like, but I think it's going to last just long enough for this build, which is kind of all I care about. It cuts super clean, super quick, super easy, and with a miter saw I can set all my angles and get all my angles cut nice and simple, save a lot of time versus the bandsaw. Just be warned, when you're using the Steel Demon blade cutting steel, it is going to throw quite a bit of metal chips. As you can see, I ended up putting my welding helmet on just because I really didn't want to get a piece of steel in my eyes. The outline of each wall consists of 6 pieces. 3 of them are identical to each other. So what you see me doing here is taking a piece that I've already cut, and I want to reproduce that piece exactly to keep everything nice and square. So I'll lay the piece on top of it, line it up with my saw, make sure it's going to cut at the exact same length, and then remove the piece, clamp it down, and cut it. Alright guys, here's our pieces that you saw all cut out and laid out in the shape that they're going to be laying. So this is the front of the trailer, that's the back of the trailer. We will be around right here somewhere. So you're going to need 2 pieces. These are 7 foot long right here. There's a 45-degree cut right there and a 22.5 degree cut there. 2 of those, and then these are 3 foot and 3 foot, and that's going to be 45-degree cut there and a 22.5 degree cut there. Our little end pieces that we have here are 17 inches overall length, and they have 22.5 degree cuts on both sides. And we do 22.5 degree cuts because when they butt together, we get a 45-degree angle. So hopefully that's easy to follow and easy for you to understand why I chose the angles that I did. With our pieces cut, now I'm working on removing the Millscale so we can prepare for welding. What I'm using is a Craftsman Restorer, and it's the paint and rust remover wheel. It is by far the most efficient way that I've found to remove Millscale, get it ready for paint, welding, or anything else you want to do with the steel. Alright guys, we got all of our pieces cut for both sides. All I've done here is just laid them directly on top of each other, because for this trailer to look right, you're going to need both sides to be exactly the same. For that reason, we are going to tack them up while they're kind of stenciled out on each other. I'm going to go ahead and use the Fireball tool square that I used in part 1. And basically this is just going to verify this is a 45 degree. It's going to help me level it out on this plane, and then also make sure my angles are correct. So basically now that they're laying on top of each other, I'm gonna tack this up, move on to my next joint, tack it up, so on and so forth, all the way around. If you've seen my previous videos, you will know this is the first build that I've used this Fireball tool square, and I gotta say that it truly helped me get this trailer square and have it turn out exactly like I envisioned. Alright guys, well here's the walls. I just have it clamped to the trailer to kind of mock it up, so you can get an idea of the shape of it, and I'm really happy with the size of it and how it's looking so far. What I'm working on next is, this is going to be our door, and we're going to be mounting that on the driver's side of the trailer. So basically what I've done is trace that out on a piece of cardboard, and this stencil is going to kind of help me figure out where I need to place these other bars, because that door has to actually screw to that on the sides and top and bottom, figuring out these bars right here, and then I'll have to add some horizontal ones as well. That'll be how we mount the doors, window over here and the window over here. To frame our door up here, we got that one front piece you saw closest to the front of the trailer, and then also the one that was a little bit further back from it. And basically we just set the door on its face, put both of those pieces on each side, measured how long our pieces are going to be here. It ended up being 27 inches. And then of course I had to cut this a little bit because it was going to interfere with that part of the trailer, how it angles up. So now pretty much all we're going to do is take our pieces of metal and get them all in there and tack them all into place. And that'll be about as simple as it is to mount our door. Go ahead and ensure your door frame's all nice and square. That way it fits well when you go to place it on the trailer. So just like we did with our door, I made a stencil with our window here, and I just kind of propped up, figuring out how high I want it and what position I want it on the trailer this way. I think I'm just going to go ahead and match it with the top of the door so it's nice and even. And then after that, I'm going to build this frame. Basically, I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the door, build a frame on the floor here, using my window to help me get it to just the right size. And once this is tacked up, I'll bring it up to the wall there and get that all tacked in place. And then we'll move on and do the other side. One thing my dad has always taught me growing up is that you can almost do two sides as fast as you can do one. So while you're in that mindset and got all the tools right in front of you, go ahead and build both of your windows at the same time, and plus you can ensure that they are the exact same shape and size. If you've already done any sort of fabrication, you could probably already catch on to the fact of how useful these magnets are. They've really helped me make sure that the surfaces are flush and hold things in place when you don't have that extra hand to hold something while you tack it. Here we are adding the rest of our vertical supports. These are going to be 46.5 inches each. All right guys, really starting to look like something here. We got the walls coming all together. We got our window, our door, our other window. Lots of support for the roof. And I also made it so right here at this joint, this pole lands on that. So then this is all going to be tied together here just to kind of further solidify this. So if you have anything on the roof here, not kind of bending on that connection right there. All right guys, with these sidewalls all done, we're going to start working on connecting them this way. Basically I just got this one wall set up here, magnet to keep it flush for the edge, some clamps to hold it. You can see the level, it's at 89.8, 0.9. It's pretty much 90 degrees. I mean, that's close enough for me. All I'm going to do is just kind of put a couple tacks all along this. We got our surfaces painted, all the ones that are going to be against each other, so there's no bare metal left. We're going to tack it up in a few places, move all this stuff over the other side, tack it up, and then we're going to start adding our bars across this way. All right, so I just quickly ran around and tacked in those walls, and then we're going to go ahead and start cutting our horizontal bars, which are going to be 55 1/8 of an inch. We are going to do 4 of those, and just like we've done in the past, once you cut your first one, use it as a stencil to cut your next ones, so you can lay it on top of the metal you're about to cut, line it up with the blade, make sure that it's the exact same length before you cut, because these being the same length will determine how straight your walls are. All right guys, we got our bottom bars tacked in here. I'm going to show you what I did with this rear one. It's different than the front. So because our aluminum composite sheet is going to have to stick to this surface, I actually welded this one in at an angle. So that way it gives us a bottom surface to actually stick the sheet to. So now that this is all tied together, I feel pretty comfortable that it's not going to end up warping a bunch on me. So I'm going to take my time, go around and start welding up all these things that I just have tacked. And I'm also going to add these gussets here. And I'm going to add those first before I start welding. So basically I'm going to put some gussets here in this corner, some in this corner, basically like 2 on each corner of the trailer, top and bottom. And that'll really help solidify things before the finish weld. If you're not sure where to add the gussets, I'm basically adding them in places that is going to have lateral load. So basically any pushes on left or right of the trailer, this will keep the frame nice and solid. Alrighty, we got some gussets added to all of our main corners here. We even got some up top. Really kind of solidify the whole structure of the trailer itself. Got them on these top corners there and there. And then down here as well. And of course I'm still going to be adding some lateral supports here, more verticals and stuff like that, so it's just going to get even stronger than this. So the walls all fully welded in and the main structure kind of set. We are going to work on the roof next. And in our roof, we're gonna have a spot for a vent fan. It's actually a max air fan. And because this bar is already there and these two bars are already there, we're just gonna have to cut 4 more 55¼ inch bars to match the ones we already have in there. And then we'll end up adding some side supports as well, which is what our fan will mount to, but we'll get into that in a minute. Just like we did with our windows and doors, we're using the fan as a stencil to create our frame for it. And then once our frame is created, we can actually put it up in the roof and weld it in. Here I used a combination of clamps and magnets to be my extra hands to get these bars welded in the roof. It could be a little tricky, but with some patience, it's definitely doable by yourself. Alright guys, you may have noticed that I have not done the front or back wall yet, and that's because we got to get our floor in there first. But before we can do that, we got to go ahead and get all of this all finished welded in. I'm doing that just so the sparks and stuff from the welder don't end up burning the floor. Plus it's a whole lot easier to walk around in there right now without the floor. So we're gonna go ahead and get it all finished welded in, the floor onto the trailer, and then after that, we can close in the front and back walls. I wasn't exactly sure how many welds I was gonna need, so I kind of just went around and probably did more than I needed. Guys, I went along, I pretty much just welded the camper body to the frame where all the supports are. Did some in the rear, did some in the front here, and then I went around with the grinder and smoothed out all my walls on both sides, everywhere that I have to put one of these aluminum composite panels, because I need it to be a flush surface for the adhesive. So now I got a little bit of surface rust on this bare metal because it's been sitting out. So now I'm going to run around with my Craftsman Restorer with the paint and rust remover wheel. This is what I've been using to clean my metal this whole time and clean off any of the little bit of surface rust that has formed on this. Then we're going to go ahead and start to paint this part of the frame. Because we're using Steelite, we'll still be able to weld in our cross members later. One good little trick for using spray paint is using a piece of cardboard as kind of like a barrier. So if you are spraying something you don't want to get paint on whatever is behind what you're spraying, you can kind of use it as a shield. Alrighty, all of our present structure is all coated with paint. Next up, we're going to work on getting this floor down. First thing we're going to do is run around with this stuff called Sikaflex 221. Basically, it's just kind of like a caulk, but it's going to be multi-purpose. And where we're going to put this stuff is all along these edges, all the way around. So those little inside edges we were welding to secure the body to the frame, we're going to go ahead and seal all those gaps around. That way no water can seep through the sides and intrude into our floor pan here. This stuff does come in different colors, such as black or gray. It didn't really matter for me because you're not going to be able to see any of the surfaces that I'm going to be sealing. This stuff does dry very well and hardens up real nice. It's not like your regular bathroom silicone you may be familiar with household work. This stuff is really heavy duty. What we're going to be using for the floor is this aluminum composite sheet. It's 3 millimeters thick. It's basically a small piece of aluminum and another small piece of aluminum, and in between it is sandwiched some composite material like a plastic. And it's actually really strong and pretty lightweight for what it is. The size we're going to need for our floor is 81 3/4 of an inch long and 54.5 inches wide. So we're going to go ahead and get this cut out. This is actually a 5x10 sheet, so they come in 5x10 and also 4x8. All I'm using is my circular saw, and the blade I have on there is actually a fine finish wood blade, so it's got a high tooth count. With our floor all cut out, now we're going to move on to what we're going to use to attach it. So it sounds crazy, but we're actually going to be using this 3M VHB tape. It's a double-sided, it's very, very strong adhesive. I used it on my very first trailer build, if you've been following along that long, to hold my fenders on. Didn't have to put any rivets or anything in them, and those fenders haven't moved at all. Plenty of videos online showing the strength of this stuff. I completely trust it, so that's what I'm going to use to secure these panels to the camper. And of course the corners are going to get encapsulated in with the trim, which will also help. But even if I didn't have that trim on there, these panels aren't going anywhere with this stuff. So I'm going to be using the inch. This is actually a roll I had left over. I'm going to be using the inch thick on these thicker beams and stuff like that in the center. And then I'm going to be using 1/2 inch roll to do my edges. And then I will be using 1/2 inch for the whole rest of the trailer as well. You can go on Amazon and get a whole bunch of it in bulk, which saves you some money versus buying them separately. It's a little expensive, but it's 100% worth it. After going around and making sure all my surfaces are free of debris, I'm going around and laying down this tape. The red coating you see is nice because it keeps the adhesive protected until you're ready for it to be stuck to something. After getting it laid down in all the places that I'm going to need it, went ahead and peeled up the adhesive, and then we can start setting our floor in place. All right guys, the floor is all in. I'm not going to lie, trying to set that with one person was really tricky, and I ended up not getting it set perfectly like I wanted it to. It's a little further back, but that's okay. All the edges are still sealed. Now I'm pretty much gonna take some of that Sikaflex, and I'm just gonna lay it down all the way around this whole thing, just to ensure that we're not gonna leak later. But this floor is now permanently bonded. Later on, we're gonna end up doing some insulation and some other flooring over top of this, so you won't ever see any of this stuff ever again. Alrighty, I did the Sikaflex all the way around. In the end, I ended up using probably an entire tube and then some on this lower half, just because I really don't want water to be able to leak in between the frame and the body. So now that that's setting up, we're gonna start working on our walls here, because the only reason I did that first before I put the walls up is because it was a little easier to get it in there. Now that that's in, we can finish out our front and our rear walls. Basically all we're gonna do is cut two 55-inch wide pieces for the front and the back. We have them up here on the top because that is where we have our angle that angles back in the front and then comes up from the back. So we're gonna go ahead and get those cut, weld those in, and then we're gonna measure for the other pieces. Just like we did for our rear lower bar, I'm welding it in at an angle so our aluminum composite sheet has something to stick to. We're doing this for this front bar and then also the rear bar. Next up, we're gonna run some supports from that front bar up to our roof, and these are gonna be 15 and 5/8 of an inch long. These next bars are gonna be 35 inches long at the longest point, and the top side is going to have a 45-degree angle cut in them. That way it can conform to the angled bar that we welded in the middle there. The rear wall of the camper is just rinse and repeat of the front. All the same measurements, it's just upside down. All right, that's all of our walls welded in and also painted. So now we got no more bare metal, nothing to rust up on us. Got the floor all in. Next step, I think I'm going to do some more aluminum composite paneling, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and get the roof on while I have access to getting underneath of it, kind of make it easier. All right guys, first thing we're gonna do is cut our aluminum composite sheet to fit our roof. So basically we need exactly 7 feet, which is 84 inches. So all I've done is, you can see I got that line there, that's right at 84 inches, and I'm using a scrap piece of the aluminum composite from the previous cut as a fence. So basically I'm just going to take this skill saw, and it's just got a high tooth count blade. It's the same thing I cut aluminum with. Any high tooth count blade will cut this stuff. This stuff's actually pretty soft. So we're going to use that as a fence so we get a nice straight cut. We'll go ahead and use our saw, cut that, and then we'll work on getting it fitted to the roof. With our top sheet cut, what I've done is I've laid it up here, and I'm just kind of fitting it up, making sure everything looks good. I know there's extra over here, but I'm going to show you what I'm end up doing is once this is stuck, I got a router I'm going to use, and the router has a little roller that'll roll against this, so then I can cut it perfectly flush all the way around this whole thing. There won't be any crazy gaps or anything like that. So as you can see, the back is already flush. This side will need a little bit of trimming, and that side will be a little bit of trimming, but it'll be nice and easy with the router, and then it'll be the perfect fit for that top part of the roof. Same process as the floor. Go ahead and make sure your surfaces are clean, and then lay down your VHB tape in preparation for sticking the roof. With our tape stuck to the top edge, I left the red surface on there so it's not sticky yet. Went ahead and positioned it exactly where it's going to be, and the easiest way I'm thinking to do this, I've clamped one end. So because of this stuff is flexible, I'll be able to lift this up, start peeling the red surface off, which then will allow it to be sticky. So once I peel some of that off, I can stick this side and then just kind of work my way down this way instead of just trying to peel it off and then set it down on there perfectly, which would not be possible, I don't even think, with 2 people. But I think this is going to work out pretty good, so we'll see how it turns out. This method turned out to work very well, and I actually also used some scrap 2x4 to help hold up the aluminum composite sheet while I was peeling all of the protective coating off the VHB tape itself. With the ceiling all stuck, I ran around with the router and cut all my edges nice and flush with the frame. Here we go, we got the roof all on. Nice and solid with that VHB tape. As you hear, there's no rattling, no buzzing. Sounds like it's part of the trailer. That's because it is. That stuff's permanent bond. Later on, we'll have to cut out the hole for the roof vent. Not worried about that at the moment. All right, I decided we're gonna do this sidewall first. So this is a 4x8 sheet, so it's already the perfect height for this, which is another reason why I made this 4 feet, so to make things a little simpler. And of course, we have an 8-foot total thing, so all we're gonna have to end up doing is chopping off a corner here and a corner here once it gets stuck up there. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and put the VHB tape all in our frame here, and thankfully our little outriggers here will actually support that. So then all we gotta do is pick this up, set it in place, and then lay it flat against the wall and stick it to the tape. So it'll be much simpler than the roof was, and then we will just repeat the same process for the other side. At this point in the build, it's really starting to feel like things are moving along nice and quickly now that most of the fabrication is done. Sticking these walls on is really not as maybe difficult as I imagined. I will also say that putting on a panel that is larger than you need and then using the router to cut to fit is the way to go, because when you're dealing with this VHB tape, if you cut out a perfectly sized panel, you may accidentally start sticking it in the wrong spot on one side because it's such a large piece, and the next thing you know, your panel's crooked on your wall, and there you've wasted a bunch of VHB tape and possibly the whole panel. Moving on to cutting the holes for our doors and windows, what I did for the door was just use a cardboard stencil that was the size of the part of the door that had to insert into the wall. So this is a little bit smaller than the stencil we always using to mock it up, and it made it super easy to cut the right hole by just putting it up there, tracing it out, and then I ended up figuring out the angle grinder, and then finished off with the Leatherman and the little handsaw was the best way to get these holes cut. Alrighty guys, we got all of our holes cut. I think the main thing to take note of on this step is, see, I didn't use the router because we needed to leave those corners there. If we didn't leave those little rounded corners, then actually the window wouldn't fill it out and there'd be a huge hole up there in the corner. So that's just something to take note of. Yes, the frame of it is a square, but it's gonna have to be rounded on the corners for everything to seal up right. I actually ran out of VHB tape, which is why the front and rear walls are not done yet. Ended up working out pretty nice. I had nice airflow through here while I was working on the windows and the door opening. I think next I'm gonna go ahead and mount the door up, and then after that I'm gonna look at mounting the windows. The windows might have to go last after the interior is done, just because of the way it sandwiches together, but we'll just have to see. Maybe I can temporarily install them. Securing the door was a lot easier than I anticipated. Basically just put some butyl tape all around the edges, and then there's some holes and some provided self-tapping screws. So we put the door up in its spot, make sure it looks level, and then use the self-tapping screws to secure it to the steel frame that we made around it. And while I was at it, went ahead and took the router and cut out the hole in our roof for our vent fan. Alrighty, so that's installation of the door. As you saw, I put some butyl tape all around the edges here, which is supplied with the kit. You can get the installation kit with the door, and that is what's going to give us our weather seal. And then they give us some self-tapping screws, which basically those screws screwed into the metal frame that I made around the door. So that's how that's mounted right now. It's not clamped by anything. There is another ring on the inside that we'll put on once we get the interior done. But for now, the door is mounted and functional. And next, we're gonna get to working on putting this roof vent in. I pulled back the protective coating on the aluminum composite sheet. Since we're gonna be sealing these edges with some caulk in the end, all I did was take a Sharpie and mark where each of my corners are gonna be, and that's really gonna help me center it up. So then our screws that are gonna go in are these little dots on the outside. So it'll help it all line up nice and easy. This is what our butyl tape looks like. Comes in a big roll like that. Yeah, basically, so you just wanna have it nice and consistent all the way around. And as you screw this down, you're gonna have some bleed out that you might have to trim with a razor blade, but that's all good. That just means it's sealed up nice. So now that we got this sitting on the fan, we're gonna go ahead and place it up there on the roof and get it screwed down to the frame. This butyl tape is really sticky stuff. That's why I wanted to mark my corners and make sure I was putting it in the correct spot the very first time, so I didn't have to pull it back up and try to readjust. There's a lot of little screw holes around this whole vent, and I assume they do that just to make sure you're not going to have any leaks. So I'd suggest go ahead and using them all. All right, here's the MaxxAir vent fan all screwed down, and I used some more of that Sikaflex on the edges, even though the butyl tape was there. So that thing should be extremely watertight. Shouldn't have to worry about it leaking on me, which is the last thing I want. Then next, I'm gonna run around with the vacuum, clean some of this stuff up. I still have the protective coating on the floor. You probably clean this up, and then I'm gonna take some more of that Sikaflex and run beads all along this bottom edge, just to further solidify no water is gonna be able to come up under the wall there. All right, guys, I didn't show it because it was a lot of boring stuff, but basically I went around with the Sikaflex and did all these outside seams, anywhere that water could possibly intrude if it gets past the outer seal. And my VHB tape finally came in, so I'm about to put these front and back walls on, and then after that I think we're gonna wrap the video up. Gonna go ahead and get our VHB tape on the rear wall, and then we're also gonna go ahead and put it on the front while we're in the mode of sticking tape. Just make sure these surfaces are nice and clean when you're applying them, just like we had before. The piece we're going to use to stick to this front wall is going to be about 35 inches tall, and it's going to be a little wider than the trailer, but we're not too worried about the width. We can trim that with the router, but our height has to be just right because we will not be able to router the top or bottom edge once it is stuck up there. On the back side, the height does not matter because we'll build a router along that top edge. What I've used is just some clamps on that lower bar, and that will act as a resting point for my panel. So then I can just rest it right there on those clamps, and it'll be in the perfect position to still allow me to put on my lower panel. So that's the front and back walls on. Obviously these are still hanging off. We're going to trim these with the router once we get the rest of the wall on. So next I have to actually cut and measure this one to actually fit just right. So it's going to be 17 inches. So basically just a 17-inch wide piece. And of course we'll have some overhang, but we're going to clean that all up with the router after it is stuck up there. Before actually sticking the piece on, I always like to do a dry fit with the adhesive not exposed, just to double check which way it fits best or how it's going to fit before I commit to it. Then to finish it off, we just go ahead and router our excess off the front and back of the trailer. Guys, I think that's where we're going to wrap this video up. We got all of our panels on here, on the front and on the rear, and it's really starting to look like it's coming together. Alright guys, as always, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment, let me know what you think. Hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you aren't already. And we'll see you on part 4.